Hey, and we're back with another episode of Before You Buy, that show where we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. Today we're talking about Thymesia, or Thymesia, or however you want to say it. We've been playing this here at gameranx, and this is co-written by my colleague Eric Thielenhaus behind the scenes. Now, just know that this is developed by Overborder Studios. It's $30 US, and it's another Souls-like. Yes, but it's a pretty cool one. Now, this game takes place in like a plague-ridden type of kingdom, and it's a mysterious place built into this huge tree, and you play as Corvus, this incredibly awesome-looking character who is stricken with amnesia, and the main goal is to acquire all the cores and find a cure for this deadly plague that is destroying everything. Now, like many Souls-like games, the story here is vague. They drop you into this world and expect you to figure it out. Now, we'll get more into that later, but gameplay-wise, in our opinion, the combat mechanics are definitely the major highlight of the game. Now, on the surface, it plays like a standard Souls-like, but when you hit an enemy, some green remains on their health bar. That's their quote-unquote wounds. And the only way to kill regular enemies and bosses is to drain both their white health meter and their green wounds meter. Now, if you wait too long with a wounded enemy, it'll eventually restore all of its lost health. So you have to keep the pressure up by attacking or using feather darts that don't do too much damage, but can interrupt critical attacks and interrupt their healing. Now, when you only have your standard sword as a weapon, you can mix up your arsenal with plague weapons, which can be stolen from enemies with this special Reeve attack, or permanently unlocked using shards dropped by enemies. Now, these permanent plague weapons can be pretty further upgraded, and while the ones you just reeve from enemies are single use, the ones you unlock cost this energy instead that you burn. Now, it's a fun system. It encourages you to steal powers from every enemy you find. Now, the only disappointing thing is the relative lack of enemy variety, which kind of affects the overall experience, but like, there's still a decent collection of powers to unlock. The powers and plague weapons and the green and white and the management just kind of provide a nice shake-up dynamic. You know, it makes you think slightly differently than your average Soulsborne. Sometimes enemies will get too far from where they started and their health will refill. It's kind of frustrating. It felt kind of like BS sometimes to me, but I don't know, most people who like these games are masochists, so it's not really that big of a deal, right? Now, the way death and the XP loop works is essentially memory is interrupted and then converted into memory shards. You get memory shards for killing enemies, which you then spend to level up. Now, if you die, of course, you can fight back to where you died and then pick them back up again. And along with that, you have a bonfire system, here called beacons, that do exactly what you'd expect, along with a safe haven hub area you can return to between missions that don't really offer much, but hey, it's there. Now, leveling up is straightforward as hell. There are only 3 attributes. There's strength, vitality, and plague. And they're pretty self-explanatory, so there's not really too much room for screwing up. Still, I do like that they have respec items that you can collect if you ever just want to start over from scratch. You know, the simplicity is not a bad thing by any means. After grinding so many RPGs lately, you're probably in the same boat. Like, it's just refreshing to have a good, simple, progressive system, less focused on intensely unique builds and more on just a few solid good avenues to go down. You can also unlock talents to expand your attacks, which reminds me of Sekiro more than any Souls game. I mean, straight up, there's a Makiri counter style attack, and just the way all the combat flows, yeah. But talent-wise, certain ones are clearly way better than others, and you might end up sticking to the same, but still, you're free to learn and unlearn talents whenever you want, so you can experiment with your build, which, again, is a refreshing change. You know, the respecking and relearning stuff all adds up to a really good amount of player choice, considering, like I said, you're not making drastically different character types. The wiggle room to mess around is still good. Now, all in all, you may have already heard this elsewhere, but it's true, the combat does feel like a mashup of Bloodborne and Sekiro, which introduces some awkwardness into some things. You know, for us, the deflect move feels a bit finicky, and you might end up just kind of defaulting to dodging everything. When you can get away with it, the game becomes much easier. Also worth noting, there are subquests you can access from the map that take you to bite-sized sections of previous areas where you can gain experience and collect some more items. Now, these are also necessary to get the best ending in the game if this is your type of thing. You can rush through the game pretty quickly, but certain endings only become available once you fully explore the world and find these story clues that can give you greater insight into what your goal in the game really even is. Even if you don't totally care about the story, you know, it didn't grip us the most, it is good for injecting some emphasis into a little bit of replayability. Oh, and the bosses are all pretty fun, even if they're not all the most challenging. In our experiences, this game doesn't feel quite as tough as other Souls-style games. You know, it does take a little bit to get accustomed to the flow of the combat, but once you do, it's pretty simple and straightforward, like I said at the start, you know? The first real boss is the one that was really one of the few roadblocks, mostly because I was still getting used to how the game played. Whether, you know, intentionally designed or not, the boss, that first boss, is kind of one of the big teaching moments. I think really the best thing about the combat, which again is probably the best thing about the game, the rhythm of damaging enemies with standard attacks, then draining their wounds with the claw attacks, is very satisfying. You can tell that they put a lot of time into getting the combat right here, and in our opinion, it feels better to just play than a majority of some of the other Souls-like games out there, excluding the big ones like Nioh. Now, this is just a fun and intuitive system. Everything else just feels kind of adequate. You know, definitely not bad, but not like super compelling and ultra memorable, and, you know, it doesn't have a ton of charm. You know, the enemy types, like we said, aren't much to write home about. Some of the bosses are cool, some of them aren't, most of them aren't the most challenging. The environment's a little dull around the edges here, especially like considering the fact that like it's based on this whole cool plague world. There definitely could have been a bit more for us, just more atmosphere overall we would have loved to see. And the game is fairly short, you know, with only a few small-ish main areas. Like we said, you are going to want to collect all the extra stuff to get the real ending, but it depends on how much you care about the story and if you like the combat enough to really dive into that replayability. To be honest, we're always down for other Souls-like style games. This like newer genre is pretty awesome, and this one is fun to dive into, but like if you're looking for the next big thing with this style of game or a really big refresh, I don't think you're gonna get that here. It wasn't quite what I wanted. Like, it didn't totally fill in the gap, you know, that hole in my heart that is missing a Bloodborne 2. I was hoping another developer would come and do it, and this looked like that. It's not quite the case, but it's still a decent playthrough. If you're looking for something like Elden Ring, no, just no. But if you like a straightforward, standard Souls-like RPG combat experience for half the full price, or even if you get it on sale, it might be worth checking out if you're an enthusiast. But that's it, guys. That's how a before you buy works. You know how this goes by now. We give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion, and now we want to hear yours. Have you jumped into this game day one? Did you blast through it like we did? What do you think of the combat? Are you also more intrigued by Corvus and the story and the world? It kind of bounced right off of us, but if you feel differently, definitely let us know. Let's talk about any of this stuff regarding the game down in the comments. Now, if you enjoyed this and maybe we informed your purchase or anything at all, clicking a like button is all you got to do. It helps us out, and we like really appreciate it. But that's it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.